Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Sharon. And Jill, it's a real honour to follow you. It was so great. I just want to say the personal story at the end about your family I thought was very compelling. And I'd just like to tell a little personal story. I'm a West Australian. I actually grew up in Kalgoorlie. And when I left Kalgoorlie, I came to Perth to study. I studied at Curtin and did a degree. And I didn't originally come to go to Curtin University. I actually came to play football for South Fremantle, and I sort of discovered that I wasn't quite as good at football as I thought I was, and study seemed a bit more interesting and the like. Anyway, 40 years on, I went back to Kalgoorlie for a reunion of the football team that had won the grand final when I played in it. I was just one of the players, and everybody turned up, and the two teachers who coached us turned up, and one of the teachers, a man by the name of John Kennedy, who also had come to my inaugural address when I became a professor here at UFWA, stood up and said, you know, this is really amazing. We're all here. We're all still alive, which in Kalgoorlie wasn't always a guaranteed thing. He said, there's no obvious serious alcoholism here, which is another thing. He said, no, nobody's been in jail. There's no serious tattoos on display. And he said, and Bob Wood is a professor. How does that happen, right? There you go. So it's not, I sometimes describe myself as an accidental academic. And as universities have become more bureaucratic, and I'm sure, Jill, you understand this, entrepreneurial activities just require so much more energy. Well, look, what I want to talk about today is the Gender Equality Project, and while it does deal with gender, it really is about diversity and inclusion much more broadly. The question as to, we are funded by industry partners as well as grants, and they include the banks like ANZ and Westpac and New South Wales Police Department. We do work with the Australian Defence Forces and New Zealand Defence Forces and New Zealand Police and Bank of New Zealand, and Cause Westgarth Chambers, a bunch of people. And so what we do is we do research, and then we try and convert that research into products that then can be used, and we continue to gather data. And one of the questions that often comes up, why focus on women? Why not focus on other minorities, for example? And we give three answers. First of all, if you go out to tackle a problem, you need focus. And so there's a lot of substantive knowledge that goes with different areas, like if we're dealing with cross-cultural or gender or whatever. And so we wanted to focus in one area. And secondly, women are the largest minority group in, they're a majority in numbers, but in treatment in societies. And then the third reason was, we reckon if we can do something about this problem, then we'll learn something for other problems. And in fact, let me skip to the end and say, it turns out, with all the studies of the problems, if we would just learn to be more inclusive and to come back, Jill's point at the end is just where I'm sort of starting, which is, if we actually took the energy to learn more about Indigenous languages, just imagine if each of our kids went into school and was required to learn an Indigenous language. It would be fantastic for their brains. We know if you learn a second language before the age of 7, the brain development is greatly enhanced. It would give us a deep appreciation of the other side. So walking in the other person's shoes, and there's no stronger way to walk in another person's shoes than to speak their language, both literally and metaphorically. So, and that's the solution. Let's just be more inclusive. Sort of reminds me, I came from a family where people didn't go to university before I did, and quite a religious Irish Catholic family. And I was doing my PhD, and I was trying to describe. I remember it was on a veranda of a hotel in Coolgardie, and I was talking to my mother and father and having a beer, and they asked me what I did. And so I tried to describe what doing a PhD in psychology was like, and they sort of listened for a while and thought, can't we get back to the cricket or something? But when I finished talking, my mother said, so you help people? And I just grasped it, and I said, yes. And she said, maybe they should just go to church. I said, oh, right, what the hell? Okay. So what I want to do today very quickly is talk about why diversity and gender, and this is going to be quite a brief. Then I'm going to talk about, well, where are the opportunities in this, and then talk about the research and the interventions that we do. It's not a long presentation. Now, there are a lot of arguments for why here we've got this. So Jill mastered it. Hold on. Let me just put my glasses on. Now, Yeah, I'm happy to provide the Centre for Ethical Leadership website. We have a document where we constantly update all the research around the business case and the arguments for diversity, and I'll explain later how we use that. But when you think about diversity, you really need to think why. And social justice is a very good reason. And let me skip to the end. One of the reasons why you need to be able to say why, and say why convincingly, is you need a narrative. If you don't have a narrative, then cynics, you give oxygen to cynics. You give oxygen to the easy pushback arguments. And so, long before you go into deep interventions, you need to construct a narrative that is positive and supportive. You need a narrative about why this is important for people, and it needs to be convincing. And so I've spoken to a lot of senior executives and chief executive officers and saying, look, you need, you as a leader, you can be personally influential through what you do and what you say, and then you've got systems and processes and culture. But one of your major tools as a leader to engage and influence people is through your communication. And so if you're keen on a diversity policy, then construct a narrative, because it starts to create a momentum, it starts to create a theme, and it's positive. Now, there are lots of different reasons out there. There's the equity and justice, the value alignment with money. I just want to mention two that compelled. I just mentioned these to say you should master these if you want to push the narrative. And so Paul and others, senior executives here, need to talk the narrative, not just talk about the programs, or not about what we're doing or how we're doing it, but why we're doing it, in fact, in advance. Now, the two I like is learning and progress. Just think about this. My wife is a professor of statistics or mathematics, and she makes a very simple point. You'll never become a great mathematician by doing the same problem over and over. And I don't think anybody would contest that, right? However, the moment you start doing different problems, there's a risk. You might fail. You get outside your comfort zone. And the same thing is about diversity. Without diversity, learning stops. The brain atrophies. There's no progress in society. So this is just a new level. But the problem, of course, is we reach a period of comfort, and diversity carries with it both an opportunity and a threat. And so the question is, can we frame this as an opportunity rather than as a threat? And that's part of what the narrative is about. You should be talking about it. We're open, we're diverse, we're a learning society. And really diversity, above all else, is about learning. And it's not learning or performance. I mean, it's not the way it works. I mean, sometimes we have to schedule these things. It's learning and performance. So it's about progress. How many of you are the same person that you were when you were 16? Aside from those of us with sort of rather backward looking. But the point is, you're changed, you're different people. You go home to Kalgoorlie and you discover you're different because of the diversity of experiences that you had out of that. And so this framing diversity as an opportunity. The other thing is asset utilisation. There are this research, particularly around gender, that if we fully utilised all the trained women in society effectively, even as part-time workers, I think Goldman Sachs estimates it would put another $11 billion on our GMP. Now, even if that is black magic sort of calculations, it's a big number. Now, Australia is number one in the OECD for female participation in education. This is a great country. If you have a daughter who you want to go to kindergarten or secondary school, it's a fantastic country. We're about 37 for female labour participation. And our numbers get worse as you get high up. Now, we look good against Kuwait and all those countries, no? But when you look at European countries, though interestingly, Kuwait does have female quotas in engineering for university and for working on sites. So you see that happening in Australia. So the point is, we have this massive underutilisation, and one of our partners, Cause, we've been working with, looking at what's the cost of, when a woman goes off to have a child, if she doesn't come back and if you don't retain her, what's the cost? So it costs about $3 million to get a partner up to a partnership level. That's net. It's not, so and then at that point is when they start generating a lot of revenue. So if you leave them and replace them with somebody else, it's like you have a very expensive machine it's just hit its straps, and you say, oh, look, we'll take that out of operation and get a new machine. If you did that as a manager, you'd be sacked, but you can do it with people all the time. So these are two arguments. I don't personally like referring to people as assets, but it's very appealing to the business community. So these are narratives that people construct. Okay, now, where are the opportunities in terms of design? And this is pulling together some experience. I think, first of all, the big issue, and I heard Paul Johnson talking about unconscious bias, and that's a big topic, so that fits in the people and cultures and what people say. I think the other, and I'm going to focus mainly in that area, I just want to acknowledge the other. Often work design and practices. We have a work design model that was invented post-industrial revolution. It's about being located in a place, doing a particular set of tasks, and then what happens, those tasks become a job, people build an identity around the job, and there's a clear hierarchy, and it's, there's silos at every level, and it's very, very difficult to change. And the rigidity facilitates concerns about, concepts like efficiency, control, and command. Now, the liberation of technology has happened, but it hasn't bitten deeply into the workplace. We still build lecture theatres like this, and there's overwhelming evidence that a better way to teach is to flip the classroom, right? Everybody watches it on YouTube, and then you come into small groups and discuss it, but we're still building lecture theatres, or hopefully we're about to stop building lecture theatres. But so it takes people time to adjust to technology, and there's a lot of work being done now, I know, looking at this issue of flexibility. And I think if that's not solved, then the inherent rigidities of current work make it very, very difficult for women to either labour under current social expectations and work full-time or part-time in life. Systems and process. The other is a big issue with supply chains. Now, the fact of the matter is, in many areas, particularly in the technical male-dominated areas, not enough girls are doing Year 8 maths. Now, that's changing, but the reality is, if you don't do advanced maths from Year 8 onwards, you can't get into certain types of degrees. And so it's not, the point I want to make is, for some areas, it's difficult to solve it, and it's going to take longer term. Okay, let me now talk about people and cultures. And I want to talk about 3 types of interventions that we've used. The first one is one I'd normally put last, but it's kind of good. It's about language. Now, Scipione, the Commissioner of New South Wales Police, has a diversity policy. And if you can imagine, in New South Wales Police, there's a lot of cynicism about this. There's mindsets that say women can't do the front line, or what happens if we get caught up in a aggressive confrontation and all that. And against that is evidence that when females are present, this is US data, officers are less likely to use their guns. So there's all a mixture of evidence. There's no knockout punch. But basically, Scipione was told from the government, you need to run a diversity problem. You need to get more women in frontline operations. It's happened. New Zealand Defence Force has done this, and others. And so he pushed it. And he sort of did an interesting. We sat around and talked to him about it, and he said, "Oh, we're going to run training programs on unconscious bias." And I said, "Well, look, that's interesting, but right now the cynics own the space. So if you go to, I visited a whole bunch of places, and we talk about gender diversity, and there were a lot of smart, cynical people, the sort of people I used to play football with in Kalgoorlie, who could tell you, they could make jokes, and if you came back with some counter evidence, they would have a yes but. And so we said, look, the cynics are getting too much oxygen here. They've got more energy. The dominant narrative is male, it's aggressive, and it's not pro-women. And he said, so, well, what do you do to change? And I said, well, who are key leaders in this? And he said, well, the key people are our inspectors, because our inspectors, they're one below the senior executive, which comes down to assistant commissioner, but they head up in inspectors, superintendents. So the superintendents would run teams, and then inspectors run teams of teams. And they've all come through the ranks. He said, so we want those people to carry the narrative. So what we do is we take all these arguments for diversity and we bring these inspectors in to a communications program. And I can describe it really quickly. Right? First of all, we do a baseline measure, a 360 on their personal attitudes and other people's ratings of them around diversity and inclusiveness and the like. They then do the program and they're given a series of tasks. Now on the program, it's really simple. We teach them through a method called Minto Pyramid, and this is how you structure arguments. It's used by consulting firms like McKinsey and others, and how do you put out a deductive argument. And what they do is they build up, we give them all the information about diversity. So it's really, they're learning about communication, but the content's diversity. So they love learning about communication and working on the idea, if we get them to sort of repeat this argument 3 times in the day, they'll start to believe it. Well, actually in the 70s, that's what the attitude research showed, right? That's where we got the idea. If you wanted, you'd measure a person's anti-communism. If you then got them to write an essay pro-communist, their attitudes change. And if they stood up in front of an audience and read it out, they change more. If they stood up in front of an audience and read it out and then had to answer difficult questions, their attitude, pro-communist style, went like that. That's what we were trying, right? So, and what would happen during the day is they pull all their arguments together with our assistants. They'd then do a formal presentation, be videotaped and get feedback. In the next one, they'd be in a team meeting. They had to use the same arguments, and they had them in front, and they'd have to maintain the conversation. They'd get videotaped and feedback. And then finally, they would they'd be engaged in a conversation. So we'd say to them, what are the sort of things that the cynics say? And they're really sophisticated things like, that's just total bullshit. Or stuff like, and so then, but it puts pressure on you, right? And so then they would practice this under pressure, and we'd videotape them and give them feedback. And then they would have to go out, back to their job, and talk about it. And I used to get these phone calls. This one guy said, first of all, they practiced it at home and stuff, and this one guy said, look, it was a 25th anniversary, we were giving a person a gift, and so I was talking about him, and then I launched into diversity. And he said that from the back of the room, who he couldn't see, somebody shouted, shut up, you wanker. And so I want to make the point, right? This is not like those training movies where everybody says, oh, now I see it, right? Now I get the line. So this was, and it was quite interesting. But they really they were empowered by the communication skills, and so this narrative is now getting out there. Does it make a difference? Well, as you can see here, we did a baseline assessment, and then 3 months later we did a follow-up assessment with the 360. And the results are quite interesting, and there's a big sigh of relief when we had to report these back to the Commissioner, right? So what do you see here? This is across, it was about inclusive communication, inclusiveness in decision-making, and pro-diversity policy. Interestingly, the self-rating of the superintendents went down. So what do you think that might be? Yeah, their expectations went up, right? They thought, wow, there's a lot to it. Look at this. It's fantastic, right? It changed. Now, this is, one swallow does not a sort of summer make, but it's the beginning. And so all inspectors go through this training now. And they're all, there's still a lot of cynics. And, and the argument for Scipione is, look, if we start getting the narrative out there, it starts to change the culture. There's a whole bunch of other things nested under this. Sexism, sexual harassment, violence, but the point is, if the senior people are talking about it and they're confident talking about it, then it's going to set a context in which certain behaviours don't look okay. So, a sexist joke starts to feel a bit more difficult. Or at least if you're caught up in the locker room and somebody makes a very inappropriate remark, sexist remark, at least at the back of the person's mind will be, I was in another situation where I was talking about this and it felt different. Okay, so that's the communication strategy that we run out in various places. The next one, now a lot of people talk about unconscious bias, and it is interesting, right? And I love the fact that people are really interested in it because we've got some fantastic research programs going on. We're doing this with the Australian Defence Forces, and I think, as Paul said, with unconscious bias, what you need to do is make people aware of it and then give them compensatory strategies. And so what we do is we run people through a simple test. It's an implicit attitude test, similar to the Harvard Online one we've developed. And it looks at people's associations between concepts like leadership and Gender, in this particular case, so this person has much stronger association between male and leadership than female and leadership, pretty typical. It varies. The work we're doing with the New South Wales Police Department, New Zealand Police Department, they're quite interested in the fact of racial profiling, which is another example of unconscious bias, right? And it often happens, just like unconscious bias works. They'll see a young Maori kid, and then they'll think, oh, that doesn't look right, shouldn't be here. And then they jump into it, and then the whole process takes over. And so we intervene with really simple strategies that, as Paul said, you've got to raise it to consciousness. So we're piloting a little program where when two police officers are in a car and they see somebody, they have a little question and answer routine that they go through. And so all it does is put the process into a conscious level before they're committed to action. Now, they still might override it. Because they'll have cynicism about it, but at least it gives it a chance. And so that's the unconscious bias. And so what we do is we train people 2-hour workshop, 2.5-hour workshop, and then they develop a set of compensatory strategies. And to do that, they think about bias hotspots, and so they might think about meetings as a bias hotspot. And so what's some simple strategies for raising consciousness? Now let's be clear, unconscious knowledge is how we survive. So you can't be conscious every moment of every day. It's just, you've got to pick your moments. So where are the high-risk, high-impact decisions? As I said, these go down. Now, this is on our unconscious bias research, which underpins this. This is from a study done by one of my PhD students. Her name is Anna Janat. And this is a meta-analysis of 103 studies, the report's published. Now, I just want to make this point. One of the major sources of unconscious bias is this little relationship that I showed you, male-female. How does that play out? Well, it plays out like this. If I'm interviewing Jill for a leadership role, my mental stereotype of a leadership role is about males. It's about agency, decisiveness, assertiveness. And so when I'm looking at Jill, okay, I'm looking at a woman, right, and there's a different set of constructs, and so it's bouncing around. So if I'm rating Jill as a leader, I tend to do a few things. I rate her down. I'm more critical of information. I ask more questions. I'm a little bit more demanding. All perfectly rational from my point of view. Just different than if I'm talking to a shad, right? Because I've got a certain cognitive efficiency when I'm talking to a shad because he starts out by fitting the stereotype. Now, Jill's then's got an option, which is what this research. She can start to behave like a man. And now I'm not talking about growing beards or anything like this. I'm simply saying, just so men, the stereotype of men is that they're more agentic. That is, they're more decisive, more take control. So let me just give you an example of what this means from one of the research studies. In a meeting, I'm interviewing Jill, and there's a bunch of us, and I say to Jill, so Jill, I see you did a pretty good job on this team that you took over. What did you do? Now, Jill at that point can answer in a female stereotypical way, which might be something like this. Well, look, I went in, the team really was having difficulties. They were a bit confused. There hadn't been a lot of support. So we got together, we discussed the issues, and we collaborated. I then worked out what our objectives were. We thought, and look, these people were fantastic. They put in really long hours, and they were okay. And then a couple of the people decided that it wasn't really for them, and so they left, and we had a great party, and then we go, right? And then over time, we just got aligned, and we took off. And so I'm looking at this, and Jill walks out, and I turn to Sharon, and I say, well, not very decisive, that. Now, this is Jill acting like a man, in case you get confused. So Jill comes in, and I say, so Jill, so what happened here? And she said, well, look, Bob, I turned up, and it was in a shambles. Two of these people were just... So I just worked night and day. I wrote a plan, and I said to people, look, this is it, right? I've sorted it out. Two of them just couldn't align, so I got rid of them. I said, it hurt, but I got rid of them. And then we all just aligned ourselves and we got pumping. Now, Ashad, you say that, and you walk out of the room and we think, geez, this guy, he really knows how to manage it. Jill says that and walks out and we say, whoa, competent. Competent? Look at the this has got a little bit confused, but he's rated as highly competent, highly dominant, and if you look at this red line, higher ability, absolutely not. So the graph's got a bit. So we say, look, God, she's competent, absolutely fantastic, dominant. Jesus, would you want to be married to her? Of course I would, Jill, but my wife would object. But then comes out, you know what? Look, I think she's really great, got a good record, but I don't think she'll fit. So these are, now let's be clear, Ashad and Jill, this could be a videotape, it could be a live actor. We've balanced them for attractiveness. It's exactly the same behaviour. And you think, oh, well, experienced selectors, I've done this, look, forget it. These can be students evaluating other students, they can be experienced selectors, unless you make yourself consciously aware of it. So, now the final, so these are the unconscious bias programs. Now the final one I want to talk about, and I'll just be a few minutes. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses on. I can see this is a program we're doing at Origin. So this is more in the conscious domain. Now, one of the big issues is getting people to own strategies. And I think organisations have problems. They run stuff out from the top, and there's local cynicism. So it's not as though you've got one program. You've got one program with 54 departments or whatever. And I remember I was Deputy Vice-Chancellor here for a couple of years. And we restructured the university. And there were 54 departments, and I walked around to every single department. I used to go to morning teas and talk. And what you realised, there wasn't one university. There probably wasn't 54 cultures, but there was a lot more than, I'd say, 10. So and each of them had, whenever there was a change program, I would go in, and there'd be deep cynicism, and there'd be a really smart professor who was deeply cynical, and I'd get monstered at morning tea, and then I'd go to another one, and I'd be the local hero, and yes, help us out, and so you realise you've got to try and accommodate this, and so the strategy here is, well, let's give people a sort of local diagnostic, and so they can develop and own strategies locally, so rather than top down. And Grant King, who's the CEO of Origin, and Jim Galvin, who's head of the retail, said, okay, well, let's do this. Now, so what we do is a thing called the diversity scan. Now, let me just, and then there's a workshop and there's a follow-up. Let me just explain. This diversity scan comes from another person in my lab. His name is Victor Soho, who did a meta-analysis of the predictors of women's fit, functioning and growth. And in this large meta-analysis, I think it was about 117 studies, he looked at what are the major predictors of whether women felt like they fit in, whether they performed, their health was good, etc., and then whether they got promoted. And there was more than this. Sexual harassment was one, but in consultation with industry, we reduced it to these were the top 6 factors, except for sexual harassment, which I'll come to in just a moment. And then we build a scale to measure these things. And the idea is, look, if you're measuring these things and you know what you're doing, then we know with some degree of the best evidence available that they're predictive of these things which you're interested in. We left out sexual harassment because low-level sexism is much more common and quite debilitating. I don't have time to go into the detail now, but happy in a question. Where sexual harassment, it's a very low-frequency event, massively traumatic when it happens, but it's a low-frequency event, and it confounds the rest of it. There's all sorts of denial and abhorrence and stuff tied up. So we agree. It's not to diminish the problem. It's simply to say, it needs to be really treated in a separate way. You can't measure and manage sexual harassment through a survey. I mean, unless you're using it as a leading signal. Certainly, if sexism is very high, sexism is a predictor of eventual sexual harassment, because once again, it's an enabling culture for bad behaviour. Okay, so this was then converted into a questionnaire, and it's an online questionnaire which the people do. We also get objective performance ratings of the staff with their agreement. Their supervisors rate them. We then pull together the measure and have workshops, and I'll just show you what those are. So this is, for example, if you go back, where was I? These are the factors that predict, and this is not a Origin insists that I say this is not one of theirs. It is from another one of our industry partners. So we present this. So the blue are the men's reaction. Life is pretty good here. We've got high control over our jobs, there's diversity works well, lots of opportunities for development, low-level sexism, not a lot of work-family conflict, and not work stress. For women, of course, it's a very different picture. And so one of the first things we do in the workshop is we feed this back to groups, and the groups have to be at least 40 so that there's total anonymity and the data are reliable. We feed it back to them, and we talk about the differences, and we run quite a structured workshop about why, and it goes in a couple of ways. First of all, it'll go like this. It'll be like, oh, well, Bev, you don't really feel that way, do you? And Bev may just sit silently. Or she may fold and say, no, well, yeah, it was just a survey and stuff like that. And that's one. Or another is, well, gee, why do you feel that way? And so we set it up because, people can, it's a great term. Actually, I learned it from a friend of mine, Chris Sarah. People can collude in low expectations so quickly. The comfort that goes with it. And so the moment I say to, because I'm really, Bev, you don't feel like that, do you? And she says, oh, no, I didn't, right? And then the conversation's off the table. So you have to manage this process about, let's understand, let's accept this as the fact. One person started questioning the methodology, and I have to say, the CEO said, let me just tell you something. If this was a survey of our customers' satisfaction with us, and this one, the blue one was internal, and the red one was our customers, many of the people in this room would be sacked. So, and we wouldn't be talking about the methodology, so let's stop talking about it now. It's a little technique if you're ever in this position. It works, right? Now, that's important, right? So we know the difference, but then the question is, well, so what? Are these differences important? Now, you might say, look, we've really got to work on work stress for women. But when you look at this is quite interesting. We ask about intention to leave. Work stress is not related to intention to leave. What is related to intention to leave is the lack of diversity, right? That's the number of women in the area. And this is just one case. It's different from different organisations. And low-level sexism. The other thing that influences it is lack of control over when and where and how you do work. And women bump up against that more because people who work flexibly often feel like they lose control because they're constantly being challenged, not just by their supervisor, by their peers. And so it's sort of interesting, right? The differences are important, but it's the so what. And so in the case of Origin, and this is not Origin, Origin has set itself public targets for women and it's failing to meet them. So intention to leave is important. So they need to know, okay, at all these local levels, what strategies do people come up with? What are they? And we work with them. This is another one, performance. Once again, sexism and diversity are big predictors. So in this particular organisation, which is a mining organisation, these are the two big issues. This one of their strategies is a no just joking policy. So when people make sexist jokes, you can't laugh at that. If the person says, say if I make a sexist joke and Bev says, but Bob, I don't like that, and I say, oh, I'm just joking, it's really it's a second kick, right? And then later in the day, Bev's saying to Sharon, I didn't like what Bob said, and she says, oh, stop banging on about it, he was just joking, right? She spends the whole day worrying and thinking what I should have said. And now in a mining setting, that's quite dangerous, right? Because if you're ruminating and you're not focused, you're a safety risk. And so that's the way they sell it. So they now have a no just joking. So if I make a sexist joke and Bev says I don't like it, I say, you're right, I'm sorry, let's move on. Okay, and then of course we do a follow-up survey 3 months later. Now, so let me just close by saying so as you see, I think first of all, create a widespread diversity narrative. I want to give you a negative example of the best narrative I've seen in Australia. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Kalgoorlie, there was lots of immigrants came to Australia, and I'll be finished in a minute, don't worry, yeah. And so we were taught an argument that said, Australia was built on the back of people like Uncle Peter, who came here with great sacrifice. Refugees make a lot of sacrifice, so therefore we should let them in. So that was what I was growing up on. John Howard, post-2000, the Tampa, put out another narrative. And the narrative was, Australians don't like queue jumpers. Yeah, well, I agree with that. boat people, never refugees. Okay, boat people are queue jumpers, therefore we should not let them in. That narrative, whether you think it's a good or bad thing, and I'm not even talking about the objective, that narrative has dominated Australian politics for 14 years. Even my 89-year-old mother, who taught me the first narrative, now buys the second narrative. It's just amazing. So he laid down a premise. So you've got to get a local ownership of problems. I'm just sick of, if I had $10 for every time somebody said, Bob, what do I have to do? I say, first own the problem, find a solution and implement it, and you're on the way, right? Just like you would in any other area. And that's what we try and do with our diversity scan. Target high-frequency bias hotspots. Don't try and do it everywhere. So this is, and finally, sometimes small steps are worthwhile. So a really simple strategy like we restructure our meetings so that everybody has a chance to speak, it can be a very important first step. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Bob. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but Bob will be here at morning tea. So I said at the beginning that two special qualities about Bob were this bridging of science and practice and really bringing research alive, and his second important quality around energy and passion and enthusiasm, and I think you've seen that in abundance. And it's really wonderful to see the conversations start to shift from an obsession about childcare and flexibility, which is very important. I'm not denying that for 1 second, but it's not the only story. And so it's fantastic to see Bob doing that. I wish we could have videotaped the presentation so that we could send it to your mum and show you that you are helping people in a way that maybe church doesn't. So please join me again in thanking Bob. The slides are available if you would like them.
Me again. Now look, it doesn't get much better than that, does it? I'm just so pleased that we've had such a powerful opening session, and thank you very much to Professor Milroy and to Professor Wood for a great commentary. Thank you very much. I know we're going to try and keep on time, but I have a few housekeeping matters to attend to, which I must do. Firstly, I want to say that all of our keynote and invited speakers are being offered a gift from Oxfam, which is a recognition of our appreciation of their contribution, but it's also a gift that supports others. I recommend it as a gift. If we need to leave this premises in a hurry because there's a siren or something, I suggest you come to the entrances, the doors here at the front, and left and right, and the muster point is across the oval near the trees and the Octagon Theatre. And if that was to happen, perhaps look to your left and right and see that other people around you are on the same program about getting out of the building. The conference registration offers you honorary membership of the Club Cafe, which is on the downstairs area of this building, where there's coffee and so forth. It opens at 7:30 in the morning, so there's breakfast if you like. And there's also Wi-Fi available, campus Wi-Fi available. And if you haven't actually received advice about your Wi-Fi, check your spam. If you still haven't received advice about your Wi-Fi, we have a person here, Ken Martin, who is our technological whiz kid, and he's a very dapper-looking man with red braces. He also happens to wear a fez occasionally. You should just look for the dapper man with a fez. There's not too many of them around. Thank you to our sponsors also. UniCredit has sponsored Morning Tea, and they have a stall out there on the lower foyer, and they're happy to talk to everyone about their products. That's another point. We actually have 2 levels to this building, and the morning tea and lunch will be served on both levels. So if you can't find your friends on one level, go to the other, or go out in the balcony. And you might have seen the peacocks. They're putting on a bit of a display at the moment, so check them out. I'm sure every campus has a peacock or two, don't they? And also, just to Curtin University, thank you very much for sponsoring the lunch that we'll have in a little while. Just a few more things. This is a non-smoking campus. There is a point where you can smoke at the front of the club, which is in the easterly direction behind you, and there's a seat there and there's an ashtray and so forth. There's bus transport being provided to the airport at 1 o'clock on Friday, which should connect with everyone's eastern states flights. If you want to be on that bus, can you buy morning tea today, put your name on the list at somewhere at the registration desk, just so that we know we've got enough buses. And also you can register you're interested in Terry Larder's clock tower climb on Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Now, since you're all in a different time zone, that's going to be a cinch, right? It's a great little walk, and you get a great view at the end, but only 30 people can do it. So bring your luggage, stick it in Winthrop Hall, and put your name on the list if you want to go. And Terry's also offering a campus tour tomorrow at 8 o'clock. No limit on the number of people. There's 100 years of history and gossip that Terry will share with you. You'll find in your conference pack a piece of paper that says, tell us what you do, tell us who you are. It's not just about who you are at work. It's a networking tool. If you stick that up on the notice board downstairs foyer, it's a way of other people connecting with you. You know, you might be into boot scooting or pipe drums, or and it's a way of connecting with others and finding more about ourselves besides our job title and what we do. And finally, can you just keep your lanyards on all the time? There's the staff, the conference committee and the volunteers have a white one, and you all have blue ones. So if you need help, go to someone with a white lanyard or to our wonderful volunteers who are wearing a purple T-shirt. We hope to keep on time. If anyone knows me, they know what I'm like. And I really, really want to keep this on time. And we've got this rule about you start late, you finish on time. So good luck with that. I'm hoping that we really... Because the thing that spoils a conference quite often is lousy food or really poor timing, and we want this to be a memorable experience for all of you, and it started in a fantastic way, so thank you again. Morning tea. Thank you. Do I turn all this off, or you... Dapper man?
Thank you. I'm happy to do that. You want to look at that now? All right. Now, potentially, yes, we can change it. Do you have a revised version, or do you want to edit the one that's here? All right. If you can hold that thought just for a second. Okay, you wanted to add files.
I wanted to, yeah.
No? Not that one? On this side. Yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, which one? The one at the top? Okay, that's good. Printer, thank you. Because everybody calls it presentation. Okay, so when it comes time, just open it from there, and it will be good. Right. What did you want to change? So your... Yes, yes. That's it. All right, which one is you? So, I don't see it in this room. Are you in this room?
This is on the program in
It
the
says
auditorium.
auditorium. Okay.
So, and I sent it through, and Annalie said it was on.
Yeah.
But I think the version I've got on here is also.
Okay. Yeah. Let's. So. Well, yes, that's why it's good to check. And that's what the last minute's for. Right, so we've got. Oh, see what this looks like web pages. It doesn't look like a presentation.
Right, so this is because it's I have all kinds of writing books. Now I have my phone, my smartphone, and I know I've emailed it to myself here.
Okay.
So what is there something I can do here now?
Yeah. If you email it to
Hang on, I'm going to grab
me. So if you email it to kenneth.martin@uwa.edu.au.
Now I'm an IT Luddite. I haven't. So this one, this is that's it there. So if I forward that, new recipient.